Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Okay, girls. Let's go get 'em.
Because no one thinks we have the balls to pull this off.
There's no place like home.
Hello and welcome to Girls on Film, the film review show from a female perspective. My name's Anna Smith and I'm a film critic, broadcaster and host of the Girls on Film podcast. We're thrilled to be bringing the podcast to the small screen with the BFI at home. Girls on Film looks at film through a female lens and we speak to film critics, actors, activists and filmmakers. We've been connecting with our lovely listeners during lockdown, so welcome back if you're a Girls on Film regular and welcome if you're new to the pod. Hope you're all doing okay. We have some very special guests today who are here to talk about the BFI's new season, Female Desire on Screen. Actor and director Billie Piper talks about her new film and about her on-screen obsessions.
Well, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with Madonna. Obsessed.
Writer and comedian Ronnie Ancona swoons over a forgotten classic from a female director.
It is the most extraordinary bit of female comedy that is totally neglected.
And actor and writer Sally Phillips talks about the sex scenes she's performed on screen. Should I have what she's having?
No! Should we stop now?
As a response to the season, we decided to ask some of our listeners and our Twitter followers about films that were part of their sexual awakening. And we've got some amazing responses I'll be sharing with you later in the show. Meantime, I'd like to share with you 3 of my own personal favourites. At number 3, Dirty Dancing. Who doesn't love Dirty Dancing? That first scene in the dance hall when it basically plays out like a vertical orgy. Patrick Swayze is teaching a virginal young Jennifer Grey to dance. It's hot stuff, but it's not just about sexuality. It's not just about titillation. This is arguably a feminist piece of work. It's about a young woman blossoming, coming into her own, and about being taken seriously. It's only until Baby and Johnny are on an equal footing and they treat each other as equals that the romance can come to fruition, that all that passion that's been building up can burst. And let's not forget, nobody puts Baby in the corner. Not all our favourite films stand up from a feminist perspective, but here's one at number 2 that I think really does, and that is Thelma and Louise. Of course, Brad Pitt in that iconic scene in the bedroom with Gina Davis is a moment of sexual awakening for many, many women and indeed men. And doesn't he look hot? The camera really does offer him up as a gift to the viewers. But at the same time, Thelma and Louise is very much a story about female friendship between 2 women, and ultimately that's the thrust of the story. At number 1, Y Tu Mama Tambien. This, of course, features one of the best threesomes in movie history, but it's, again, not just titillation. This is very important to the plot. And this is about 2 young men who come to sexual maturity in the hands, or rather the mouth, of a much older woman and a much wiser woman. And this is also arguably a landmark in queer cinema too. So those were my 3 choices, and I can't wait to share the listeners' choices with you later. On to our first guest. She's known for her kind of risque and slightly edgy depictions of sexuality on screen, from Secret Diary of a Call Girl to her new film, Rare Beasts. She's also known for Penny Dreadful and for Doctor Who. She is, of course, Billie Piper. Billie Piper, welcome to Girls on Film at the BFI.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you again.
Oh, you too. So we're talking about female desire on screen. Are there any examples in cinema of kind of sexy female roles that you think are done really well, or even just women who are, sexually in control in film?
I was thinking about this, and I was thinking films that feel like very much about sexual desire that I think are really interesting and not sort of simplistic. I guess the Piano was one, Breaking the Waves was something else I thought about. Those 2 sort of stood out to me because they're slightly more complex concepts of desire. They're not just, I want to fuck, do you know what I mean? It just feels more real to me. It feels more painful.
When you were growing up, Was there anything that you watched you felt was a formative moment for you that you actually found positive depiction of female sexuality?
Well, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with Madonna.
Right, me too.
Obsessed. And I think she possibly planted those ideas in my head way too early. It was so much of her art, her performance. You couldn't get away from her sexuality. You couldn't just experience it as a good bit of choreography and a nice catchy song. It was all so ingrained. So, you know, I mean, I was devoted to her, so I saw everything. And recently I haven't ever been able to get my hands on the sex book. And I said that to an editor recently, and he bought it for me. He found a sealed copy of it, which I, you know, broke open and have looked at it, I mean, constantly since. But yeah, I think that was the beginning of it all, really.
I mean, and Madonna was extremely groundbreaking because she just owned her sexuality, and she still does, you know.
She was so outspoken for a woman.
Yeah.
Then, like, she just couldn't believe what she was saying, and I just felt a fire in my belly whenever I'd watch anything of hers.
They say that you can't do the masturbation scene tonight, otherwise you'll be arrested.
So what's considered masturbation?
When you stick your hand in your...
But listen, we met in London Film Festival for your fantastic directorial debut, Rare Beasts, and hopefully the viewers will have a chance to see that later this year. Do you want to tell people what it's about?
Broadly speaking, it's about a female nihilist trying to navigate these modern times, this female modern movement in life and in love. It's so wildly different to what we witnessed in our parents. It's also very much about mental health, and it talks a great deal about the stresses that we as women encounter every day.
And you, of course, also star in it. That must have been quite an undertaking, and bravo, you've completely pulled it off. Starring and directing, yeah.
I wouldn't do that again.
Right, okay, fair enough.
I would direct again, but I think it was, you know, it was an oversight to do the acting as well. Just because I could never be fully immersed in the directing, and I was also pregnant, so that had a massive part to play in. You know, the feeling, the overwhelming feelings.
I can only begin to imagine how overwhelming that must be. One thing that really interested me about it was the conversation that your character has with her girlfriends. And when we spoke before, you said that some of that had been born out of real life conversations you had with friends about actually, you know, it seemed like they have it all, but they're actually kind of lonely. Can you speak a bit to that?
I think it was the transition from late 20s to early 30s when I saw a lot of my friends around me, and I was certainly reading a lot about it. It felt like a bit of a crisis, or a sort of rude awakening, where we would talk about the things that maybe we had got in place and our failings inevitably, and some of the loneliness that came through having it all culture, which I think has been sometimes a bit problematic, and I really wanted to talk quite vividly about that, this idea of being this sort of blinding success all the time, and how exhausting that is in its pursuit, and how lonely inevitably that becomes.
And in terms of the male character, you know, the love interest for your character, I really liked how complex and ambiguous he was as well.
Yeah, I would say the character of Pete, the sort of love interest, if you want to call him that, or anti,
yeah, kind of
hero, or just anti, and then the dad. Yeah, they are complex, frustrating men to watch, but they're also quite funny, and I think often that's the thing that becomes quite confusing.
You mentioned sort of having it all and modern day feminism. Would you call your character in the film a feminist in any way? And would you call yourself a feminist?
I think the character is confused and is probably suffering from a lot of oppression, aspiring to be liberated by this modern movement. But that's a lot of unpicking. You know, that's years and years of unpicking and conditioning, even if you're not consciously aware of it. So I think she struggles, and I think I've struggled in the past, but more and more, I don't know if it's since I've had a baby girl, I feel like I've got a bigger flame in my stomach about feminism. I didn't want to talk about it a great deal, even though most of the things I've sort of done in my life suggest that I am a feminist. I'm just someone who's maybe not made those connections mentally until recently, I guess, where I feel sort of more informed and maybe possibly even more confident as a person.
It's interesting you mentioned having a daughter. I think that's we get some male listeners on Girls on Film that say that, you know, because they care about the future for their daughter, and they care about their daughters seeing, you know, a better future and better representation on screen, you know, like what Gina Davis is fighting for. If she can see it, she can be it. And I presume you would like your daughter to be able to see that she can be anything by watching a screen, you know, not feel limited.
Yeah, I mean, that's the quest, isn't it? But you have to do a lot of work on yourself, because that's, I mean, yes, you do learn from seeing things, and definitely I've seen films that have, you know, formed my personality in part, I guess. But I guess it's what you see in your parents. That's the most impactful thing in, you know, child rearing, which is terrifying. But I'm hoping that I'm showing her that stuff, you know.
Well, cinema so often has kind of female stereotypes that are really cliched, and particularly in the kind of romantic arena, you know, you often get the compliant female or the femme fatale, and there doesn't seem to be much in between. What do you feel that's moved on in the last few years?
I definitely feel the sort of desire to unleash from women, and I think a few people have been quite pivotal in that movement. Obviously, you would look at someone like Phoebe Waller-Bridge and Lucy Prebble, who is my love and co-worker. She's been doing it for a long time, but
well, I was going to say Secret Diary of the Call Girl, I was a big fan of. You know, it's kind of groundbreaking in its own way, don't you think?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I don't know how it would, if it was released now, what people would think about it. Because at the time, although lots of people watched it, it was like a numbers success. It was a critical hemorrhage. I mean, it was awful. People had very, very strong and dismissive feelings about it. And I wonder what that would be like now.
What were the problems with it generally?
That she was a sex worker who quite enjoyed her work. And if you pull from the book, it started as a blog and then it became a book, and then Lucy adapted it. You know, it's all in there. These are her instincts, these are her feelings, these are her stories, her sort of memoirs. So, you know, it was almost unthinkable for people. There's a lot about in the origins of the show that we really wanted to explore that I don't think we were able to, because it had to have a slightly more populist appeal, which sort of seems completely mad given its content.
So what else are you up to? Are you able to do much work in lockdown?
I sort of... I started off trying to do all the sort of online obligations. So we're currently finishing something at the moment, but it's been too hard because there's homeschooling and we have a little baby, and you know there's 10 dishwasher loads a day. I mean it's chaos in here.
It's full on stuff.
I've just given up.
Is there anything else you wanted to share with the Girls on Film viewers rather than listeners in this instance? Because I know you've kindly listened to the podcast before and been very kind about us.
I love it. I love the podcast.
Thank you.
You spoke with Kerry Fox recently.
Yes, and she was singing your praises as well, because of course Red Beasts. Yes. Yes.
See, I've got a lot of podcasting to catch up on. But I saw that on her Instagram, and I mean, talking of feminists, my God.
She's amazing, isn't she?
Yeah, she's amazing. She's amazing. What have I got to say? I don't know. I hope you're all right. I hope you're all coping.
Thanks to Billie Piper for joining Girls on Film, and do look out for her directorial debut Rare Beasts, which will hopefully be released later this year. The BFI season of Female Desire on Screen was inspired by a book called She Found It at the Movies, an anthology of essays from female writers. It's edited by Christina Newland, who joins me now, along with one of the book's contributors, Karina Antrobus, who also founded the Bechdel Test Fest. So Christina and Karina, welcome to Girls on Film.
Hi, Anna.
Hiya.
It's great to have you here. How are you both? Karina, what's going on? You came on episode 1 of Girls on Film, didn't you?
Yes.
Our very first episode.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, I think I just stepped straight off a plane from Sundance and I was a bit jet lagged. So yeah, it was great. It was great to be part of it, and it's fantastic to see how much it's grown, and yeah, it's brilliant. Well done.
Yeah.
And then Christina, we finally got you on Girls on Film. Welcome.
Thank you.
So we're celebrating Female Desire on Screen today, and one of the reasons for that is not just the BFI season, but also your book, She Found It at the Movies. Tell us more about that.
Well, the book came out on the 31st of March. It is an anthology which contains 21 culture writers, women and non-binary, writing about their relationship with desire in the movies and their formative screen crushes and the things that we end up learning or taking away from movies, particularly in our early years.
It's interesting that you partly came up with this idea, Christina, because the idea was that female film critics were not given the chance to write about sexuality in the kind of openness that perhaps men used to be. And I certainly welcome that idea myself. I mean, when I started writing about film about 20 years ago, I was writing for Sight and Sound and such, but it did seem to be a little bit of a taboo subject in some way, to be honest about what you found erotic and attractive. What kind of responses did you have from women critics and activists and such, like when you sort of got in touch with them about the book?
I think like anything that felt a little bit weirdly taboo, people immediately became kind of excited about it. And a lot of women immediately started talking about their own formative sexual awakenings when they saw a certain movie. Like for me, it was like Y Tu Mama Tambien, or a film like that you kind of see for the first time at a young age. So it got a lot of people talking. And I think it came back to this idea that it was somehow deemed as unprofessional to talk about these things.
Absolutely. It's all intrinsically linked, as you explore in the book. Now, obviously, Karina, you contributed to the book. Tell us about your chapter.
It took me on a journey which made me question what it was that I thought was sexually desirable and where that, what the kernels of that were in my cinematic tastes. And it got me thinking about, okay, well, what are the representations of women that look like me, or women, but basically for Black women? And I found myself, unfortunately, drawing quite a lot of blanks and having to really dig deep into the history of where my cinematic taste came from. And it took me back to a time when I remember watching Set It Off for the first time. I think I was a teenager at that point, and it was this very one particular scene, which was literally 30 seconds long, but it was so revolutionary because it was the first time that I saw a Black woman having a equally transactional relationship with her lover that wasn't something that was misogynistic, or it wasn't a MTV music video as such, which I was just so used to seeing growing up. It just made me think, well, that's a shame, isn't it? There's so few examples of Black women enjoying sex and aren't being used or abused. And I think that's why it just felt like the right thing to write about at that time.
Christina, since you came up with the idea for the book, do you feel that things have moved on and changed? Have you seen any more positive depictions of female desire on screen that indicate to you that there's a shift?
I think Fleabag was one of the things that absolutely exploded in the space of time between conceiving of the book and it coming out. And even just the depiction of female masturbation on screen, something that's relatively taboo, or it's often associated to a neurotic woman, or it's shown as something which is kind of a shameful little secret. And so the idea of the kind of casual wank to Obama that she has, even just that in and of itself, and her kind of wry asides to camera, which are showing her kind of casual attitude about sex, Playboy did a symposium on women and sex in the movies, and a journalist called Kate Hagen did a roundup of the percentage of movies, feature films, which depicted screen sex. The statistics were showing that basically sex depicted in feature films had gone down since the 1960s. It was one of the lowest amounts of sex being shown on screen. The 90s were one of the highest, which makes sense because of the erotic thriller and the popularity of that. So we're seeing less sex on screen, but more people wanting to talk about that sex and talk about how it's depicted.
That's interesting, isn't it? Fascinating. You're right. I mean, the 90s and the tawdry erotic thriller. I certainly remember loving The Last Seduction, which we spoke about on Girls on Film previously. But although there is an element to films like that which is problematic when you start to look at it from a feminist perspective, even if you absolutely love it and you love this empowered woman that you're seeing. Karina, do you think there are ways that we can reconcile our political correctness, if you like, with the kind of things we find erotic if they're actually a little bit sexist or misrepresent women in some way?
I think what I did is, especially in relation to this essay and how it got developed into the ideas that it got that I covered, it made me question, okay, well, what did I find sexy? What do I find sexy? And then I was questioning why I found that sexy. And a lot of the times, I think as you're getting older, you do need to question why you like what you like. And unfortunately, sometimes that does unravel some uncomfortable truths. So, for instance, I grew up with, very far and few between examples of pornography. A friend would have it on and we would sneak and watch it on the weekends. And a lot of that pornography was women being submissive and dominated. And I grew up thinking that that was a sexual thing that I wanted too. And to have this relationship of talking about that within this essay, I was just like, well, actually, I don't know if that is my personal desire or something that's been constructed by mainstream media. But whereas before I did think the very gratuitous, voluptuous women, to be frank, I find women sexier than men as a general rule. It's an ongoing relationship and an ongoing conversation. The things that I find more sexy now are more pure renditions of sex appeal and lust. And I think in the recent examples, things like Portrait of a Lady on Fire, you have this pure desire for one another without even seeing the connection between the two, between skin. It's just the looks and the desire. As I get older, the depictions of what I find sexy are a lot less gratuitous and a lot less obvious, and it's the films and the representations that allow me to use my own imagination.
That's interesting. Yes, our evolving relationship with our sexuality, of course, is all to do with our relationship with cinema. It's all bound in together.
I had a thought actually about what Karina was saying about that. Movies are often a lot better at portraying the sensual than they are at the literally sexual. So there's only so many ways that you can film a sex scene, and a lot of people talk about how sex scenes in film are usually a bit boring. There are, of course, exceptions to the rule, but a lot of the times I do think, in a way, I'm not sure it's even changed for me. I think like the constant for me has often been that it's the insinuation of sex that's sexiest. Sometimes not even that. To me, sometimes it's the act of looking, being able to look at a man in just kind of the physicality of, say, Marlon Brando in Streetcar Named Desire, or someone like that. Just looking at him is enough,
One thing, Christine, that I've noticed when I've started analysing it more recently is that one of the things I find most erotic is seeing a woman enjoy herself. Is seeing female pleasure on screen, because so often, as Karina was saying, we were denied that growing up. We were seeing this kind of male fantasy, this compliant, complicit little girl. And to see a woman in control, not just kind of being some kind of male fantasy figure, but actually just enjoying sex is such a pleasure, right?
Yeah, totally agree. And that's exactly what I was getting from Set It Off in that one particular scene, because you've had all this hardship that Jada Pinkett's character goes through, and then finally, she is being serviced by a man who is beautiful and worthy of her, and it's just beautiful and great.
Sold. Christina, do you think it's important that sex scenes are believable? If so, are there good examples of that?
Yes, I think it's important that they're believable. And actually, I did a panel before all of this started in Glasgow during the film festival. And we talked, as a part of that panel, it was about the depiction of sex on screen. And we talked to an intimacy coordinator. And a part of an intimacy coordinator's job is not just to ensure the safety of the actors on set, to make sure people are comfortable, both emotionally and physically, but also in a less kind of pragmatic sense. It is about they can be there in pre-production and during talks with the director. And not all directors and all writers, they may write sex scenes, but they don't know necessarily what they always want to happen in those scenes. And so often what you see is some like hot and heavy making out and then penetration. And you don't see like any lubrication of the female body. You don't see any of the things that the kind of foreplay that most women need and want in a scene. And so I think it's incredibly important to see that, because it changes our perspective, particularly at a young age, from what we see, that female pleasure is important, that lubrication is important. Just sticking it in there is not really like, and it also gives a unrealistic expectation to guys of what they should be expecting.
Yeah, it definitely breeds very unhealthy relationships between men and women if men are using porn as their educational tool.
Are there any examples of women in film that you would like to pick out, particularly who you think are great, sexy, desirous, or either desirable or desirous figures who you would recommend that our viewers tune into? Christina, you first.
Somebody that I was going to talk about, I guess it's not in such a literal way, but I think just everything that she stands for gives this to me, is Barbra Streisand. She has always been someone who's so in control of her own image and in control of the kind of, I guess, the gaze of her films, even when she's not directing them.
Wow, fellas. Look at the old girl now, fellas. Darling, you'll never go away. Darling, you'll never go away. Darling, you'll never go away.
And everything from The Way We Were, which is, very conventional romance, to Yentl, which is very much an unconventional romance and kind of complicated film. No matter where her desire is directed, it's about her desire. She's always kind of hungry. She's always yearning for something and someone, often, more than she's being a passive object.
I didn't expect that answer, but I really liked it. Thank you. Corinne, you're going to surprise me.
I guess Jennifer Lopez as well is an obvious answer for me. I mean, the wattage on that woman is just incredible.
Tabletop? I can't do that. You can do that. You're gonna do that. Just switch and rap.
And I don't know what she did in a former life for her to look as great as that, as she is almost double my age. It's just incredible.
She's been hot for as long as I've been alive, basically. I watched a film from like 92 or something. I was born in 91, and I was like, what? This is not fair. She might even be hotter now than she was then.
Long may it last. Christina, is there anything in terms of the archetypal sort of depiction of the female love interest or sex object that particularly gets your goat? Is there anything that really annoys you?
I think, like the idea of being kind of a perfect male fantasy, I think, and everything that involves, with no sense of agency, no sense of kind of interiority, the idea of like a man-eater, even a traditional man-eater in the kind of Fatal Attraction mode, for example. It's either villainized or it's idealized.
Yeah, I think it's so often we were sort of brought up to relate to either the submissive woman or the femme fatale, and there was nothing in between. But what we're looking for is something approaching reality but still sexy, right, Karina?
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many annoying female tropes in cinema. I mean, I guess that's kind of why this podcast even needs to exist. Right down from the girl who's not quite of age, but that camera is definitely lingering on her a little bit too long, up to the Manic Pixie Dream Girl, which is infuriating. All she does is basically fulfill some guy's fantasy that he's a bit of a drip, but he might just get that girl in the corner that likes to dance like nobody's looking. And then up to mothers who are divorcees and they've got kids and they're a bit of a wash up and a has-been, and as if you stop wanting to have sex just because you've had a divorce, and as if you stop being sexy just because you're over 27. It's, yeah, the cinema is riddled with really unhealthy depictions of women.
You're so right. Christina, is there anything else revolving around the book and the season that you wanted to flag up to viewers?
So on Wednesday, the 6th of May, we're having a live in discussion on the BFI YouTube Live, and people can comment on YouTube or use the hashtag on Twitter to speak with us. We're going to talk about Bound, and it'll be with two contributors to the book. She found it at the movie, so it'll be Catherine Gray and Willow McClay, who both wrote really great essays.
Bound is another wonderful example of what we're talking about, and by contrast, Belle de Jour is also in the season. I think there's so many great films people can catch up with and have conversations about, don't you think? I mean, they're like the ones that we're having now. So congratulations to you both on the book and to all the contributors and on the season. Well, listen, will you both look after yourselves, and will you both come back on Girls on Film again, please, Christina and Krona?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thank you both so much for being Girls on Film.
Thank you, Anna.
Thanks.
Christina.
Bye.
I asked the listeners of Girls on Film to share some movies that were part of their sexual awakening. Unsurprisingly, they name-checked some big screen idols like Johnny Depp, Tom Cruise, James Dean, Taye Diggs, and one of my personal favourites, Judd Nelson from The Breakfast Club. Other people opted for flamboyant cross-dressing films like Rocky Horror and Labyrinth. Some people name-checked Secretary and its sardonic kink, surely vastly superior to 50 Shades of Grey, something nobody so far has admitted to being turned on by. Some younger listeners were wooed by films with intense love stories as diverse as The Handmaiden and The Mountain Between Us. One listener was particularly taken with Unfaithful with Diane Lane and a scene centering around the belly button. Do let us know if you also found that erotic. One listener remembers watching Purple Rain aged 10.5. She says, watching that film ignited a wave of butterflies in my belly that I still recall vividly. I woke up the next morning to discover I'd started my first period. I still joke to this day that Prince made me a woman. I'm a big fan of my next two guests and their work in film and TV, and I recently discovered that they're really good friends, so it's so nice to have them on together. Ronnie Ann Kona is a comedian and actress and well known for her work in TV's The Big Impression. Sally Phillips is an actress and comedian. She co-founded Smack the Pony. She was also in Bridget Jones and I'm Alan Partridge. My Zoom call with them was a bit fruitier than most. Well, Sally and Ronnie, welcome to Girls on Film.
Hi, Anna.
Hello.
Hi, Anna.
Thank you so much for joining me. Now, this episode is about female desire on screen. So I would like to ask you both a little bit about what moments for you when you were growing up were kind of formative watching the movies. Anything you found erotic, rightly or wrongly? Ronnie?
There's all sorts of films that had a huge influence on me. But I have to say, one of the films, which is an unlikely candidate that really stuck with me, was the film A New Leaf with Walter Matthau and Elaine, the brilliant Elaine May, who obviously was who wrote and directed the films. And actually, interestingly enough, if it had been done by a guy, I just think it would be right up there and constantly talked about. I'm not saying there's a direct correlation with Elaine May bumbling around in this film and eroticism, but it was very interesting because the premise, I'm sure you know, Anna, but for people watching, the premise was basically Walter Matthau is a playboy and he's burnt through all his money and he desperately needs to marry a wealthy woman, you know what I mean, to keep the standard of living that he's become accustomed to, and he ends up with this heiress who is Elaine May, but who isn't interested in any money at all because she's a professor of botany. And it's one of the most beautiful, phenomenal clowning sequences I've ever seen. The scene where Elaine May is trying to negotiate a cup of tea in a saucer and a biscuit and her glasses. It's just, I'm telling you, it is the most extraordinary bit of female comedy that is totally neglected. Anyway, but I tell you, the reason I found it very sort of interesting was because all the other films that I watched where the sort of women were these paragons of glamour and beauty and sexuality and vulnerability, you know, there was a film where where I just saw this kind of ugly, plain woman who was obsessed with her career and obsessed with her work, you know, who had all the potential trappings she wanted, but was not interested because, you know, she was a true, utter scientist and being treated as a joke by other men, you know, and being treated by a joke by the guy she married, Walter Matthau. But in the end, he realised actually that overrided everything. Her extraordinary brain was more important, and he was desperately in love with her. I find that a very powerful kind of feminist piece in a way.
I'm so glad you picked that. I think, and it's a perfect example, as you say, of things that are female-driven and female-directed getting slightly ignored by the so-called
Oh my
canon,
gosh!
you know, and by the sort of patriarchal version of film history. So that's a great example. Thank you, Ronnie. Sally, anything spring to mind for you?
Well, I'm not such an intelligent example. I just took the question very literally. Okay. Who did you fancy in movies?
Go for it.
And so I remember seeing Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, age about 11, and thinking, experiencing strange feelings for the first time. What was interesting though, listening to you talk, Ron, I remember getting completely, it's quite an average film, but Truth About Cats and Dogs.
Yes.
I remember swooning coming out of the cinema. And I think that's because that is Ben Chaplin choosing the funny girl over the beautiful girl.
I'm going to ask you both about your own sex scenes, because I know in the course of your jobs you must have had some comedy or otherwise sex scenes. Sally, anything to share on that front?
You know, when I first started, there were quite a few sex scenes that I was, asked to do. And I remember, quite a few fights about keeping clothes on or off. Now I'm desperate to take my clothes off and pay me to keep them on. But I was in Mean Machine, which I am admitting to. I don't know why. But I was I think I was pretty much the only woman in Mean Machine, which is a football film set in a men's prison. And I had to bang Vinnie Jones on a desk. I was quite worried about it. But there was I made great mates with the costume department. We came up with a plan, which was that I would wear all my costume at once. So I was going to be hard to undress in the time. And Vinny's big footballing thumbs, like fiddling with these pearl buttons and going... And eventually he just couldn't do it. Eventually he said, oh, fuck this. I just pushed my head down under the desk into the fellatio position. So it was referred to by Time Out as the shortest, most gratuitous sex scene in cinema history. But on a personal level, it was a win because there was zero nudity and I wasn't required to make any sex noises, which is always humiliating because I was at clown school, and one of the exercises, Philippe Gaulier, he got me to make sex noises. And the closer I got to the actual noises I actually made during sex, the more people roared with laughter, like weeping, banging the floor with their hands, which has left me with a permanent permanent fear of what noises do you make?
Oh no. So off-putting.
I mean, it's hard.
I had this sex scene that I had to do in a very big, with a very famous director and an extremely well-known actor who is a national treasure. I was 5 months pregnant when I had to do this sex scene, and it was a closed set, and my boobs were so big. They were so gratuitous that even then there was a closed set, the crew people, you couldn't, I don't blame them because they were like zeppelins, nowhere near my upper torso, I seem to remember. And the director then had to tell the closed crew. They had to explain that I was pregnant, and that is the reason that while I'm standing there with, I mean, it is, I will never forget it.
In terms of, we touched a little bit on more serious things about representation, and Sally, you mentioned Smack the Pony. Do you both feel that things are changing for women in the industry, particularly in comedy? Because I think that's interesting points that you've been making about comedy. Do you think that the roles are getting better and less humiliating?
I'm involved in a show called Last Tango in Halifax, which has been going for a long time, and I think one of the reasons that has become so successful is actually that they've shown older people, you know, being sexual and being attractive and being desired. It's so wonderful that there is so much kick-ass, you know, feminism out there in comedy, and it's obviously very, very exciting. At the same time, it gets a little tiring because you know it's almost like no woman did comedy before. You know, it's suddenly like they've discovered that women are powerful and funny. You know, and I think there's quite a lot of ageism that comes into play still.
Sally,
I think,
thoughts?
yeah, I mean, I think it's, in comedy, it's fantastic there's so many more women doing stuff. And the great thing about comedy is that we have a lot of, you know, writer-performers. So people are genuinely, they're talking about what they want to talk about. They're telling the stories that haven't previously been told. So that's all completely fantastic. Also, I mean, it was really notable doing the Bridget Jones trilogy that there was a lot of anxiety with the third one, 15 years on, that Bridget couldn't be someone who was just interested in calories and men.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So a lot of effort went into that workspace, and you can see in terms of the choices she needed to, for feminist reasons, for the fact that we have moved on, she needed to decide that she could have the baby without either of the men.
That's good to know that conversation was had, and I think
it was had constantly.
Yeah, and you can see the results, and I think it's happening increasingly, which is what we're about on Girls on Film and what we're trying to push forward.
So there remains this last bastion of ageism, and also I think Ronnie's point about, I mean, I have younger actress friends who are just exhausted by the fact that every single role they're required to audition for is kick-ass.
Right.
So there's still this sort of, you know, we're like, the majority of women are not kick-ass. I am not kick-ass, but I have to be consciously feminist. I have to consciously make myself sail my own boat. But I think there is this thing of if your character is playing only the shadow, the mirror image of the male hero archetype, stereotype, whatever, then that's not really that's not a proper feminine character, I think, often.
Yeah, that's in this sort of episode talking about female desire, it's interesting to think about those archetypes. Listen, will you both come back on Girls on Film, the podcast, another time, and we'll continue this conversation, because I've absolutely loved this, ladies. So thank you very much for joining the very first one. Sally and Ronnie, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Nanu.
Thank you. That almost brings us to the end of Girls on Film Online with the BFI at home. The BFI is working harder than ever to bring you programming online. As a charity, the BFI is asking for donations during the COVID-19 lockdown. Please look below the video field here for details about how to donate and to subscribe to the BFI and to Girls on Film. Many thanks to the BFI for having us, and to Hedda Archbold at HLA for producing. If you've enjoyed the show, then head over to the Girls on Film podcast, where we've got dozens of episodes featuring fun feminist film chat with Linda Hamilton, Carey Mulligan, Maxine Peake, many more, and some great female film critics reviewing the latest online releases. We've also got a Twitter page. Follow us at girlsonfilm_pod, and go to our Patreon page for some extra content with Ronnie Ann Kona doing some great impressions. Don't forget to come back and join us for our next episode with the BFI. Thanks for being Girls on Film.